Hello! Today we're breaking down how to create this super cool, very unique looking animation. And the way the magic works is by combining video footage with illustrations using EbSynth and Photoshop Generative Fill to combine into After Effects and create this very cool end result. So I've put together a few tutorials on this channel in the past about parts of this technique. We've had a look at using EbSynth, we've had a look at using After Effects many times, and we've had a look at using the new Generative Fill in Photoshop. So today we're combining forces and putting all of that together to create this cool animation. So let's get into it. So we're kicking things off in Photoshop, and I'm selecting her hair and the surrounding area just using the lasso tool, and then we're going into the new super cool Generative Fill. And I'm going to give it a prompt of flowers in curly dark hair, fantasy style, and we'll see what we get from here. And as always, we click generate, then we wait for a little while, and we hope to see some magic. And there we go, we got some little bit of weird blending happening in the hair, but we got some colorful flowers. We'll have a look at option 2 and option 3. Those are in the right direction, but not quite right. So I'm just gonna hit generate again and give it a new try. There we go, we got 4th option, a 5th option. That one is looking pretty cool, and a 6th option. So number 5 out of the generations look pretty good to me. Now I'm going to go ahead and just select her body to generate some new clothing for her instead. So I'm just trying to be somewhat careful with the selection, not cutting into too much of the fingers, and just selecting her general body shape where the dress would go. And we're going back to our friend Generative Fill, and we're saying green ornamental dress. And now we wait. And there we go, some very shiny dress, another kind of weird one, another kind of weird one. So we'll switch up the prompt a little bit, see if we can improve it, and type in green ornamental dress, light fabric, complex pattern. And now we wait, and now there we go, getting a little bit closer to what I was after. So we go Lord of the Rings, a little bit more of a fantasy setting, and we'll see, maybe that helps. We'll try. So we got some more dresses, and there we go. This is one that I feel like I can work with. And now I'm going to go ahead and generate a necklace, and at this point I'm just repeating the same process. So I've sped up the footage quite a bit, but I'm really doing the same thing. I'm going through, selecting parts of the body with the lasso tool, putting in a prompt, hoping for the best, generating, and then if I need to, switching up the prompt a little bit, editing the text, trying to get it closer to the vision that I have in mind. Or in this case, I typically don't have that much of a vision in place. It's really about playing around with this new technology of the Generative Fill and seeing what is possible to create, and then being able to finalize and establish the concept and the idea from there. So like most things AI, if you really want to be able to art direct it properly, like in a client project, I think it is kind of shaky technology, but for playing around and seeing what you could do, it is pretty cool, which is what we're doing here. This is really just playing around for fun and trying to come up with a cool concept and do a little bit of an animation on top of that. So I'm going through and adding more and more layers, stacking things on top of each other. The nice thing about doing it in Photoshop is the fact that it is generating each generation as a separate layer with its own mask. That means that it's easier to control after the fact, and you can blend layers together. And sometimes things do go wrong. So here I'm trying out stuff with the face, and nightmare stuff is going on here, so I do not really want to use this stuff in the end result. No. So I'll go ahead and make some final tweaks. I'm still going through and doing the similar process. I'm just jumping around and trying to edit stuff in a way that I think that the end result is going to look nice, but it's also going to work for the EbSynth process, which is going to be the next step. So I'm just done a duplicate of all the layers, merged them together, and I'm adding some filters And now I'm gonna go in and do a little bit of manual adjustment just to break things up a little bit, because I'm not really looking for a photorealistic style per se. I am looking for something that's going to work for EbSynth. I'm looking for something that's going to be a cool and unique visual style. So I'm doing a little bit of drawing on top of it and breaking things down into simpler shapes and simpler shading. And now we'll go ahead and throw things into EbSynth. You know the process at this point. We'll import the video, we'll import the keyframes, we'll run the EbSynth process, we will expect that things will go wrong, and then we'll find out where are things going wrong, handpick those keyframes after the fact, throw them into Photoshop again, and do a little bit more cleanup. And that is again why I want to be able to control the style itself and not just rely on whatever the AI is doing only. So in Photoshop, what I'm doing is I'm selecting the keyframes that I feel like here is a good place where I want to fix things, because that's going to help the rest of the animation. I'm importing those keyframes, and then I'm importing the video footage on top of it to use as a reference. Then I'm turning down the opacity of the reference and doing a little bit of cleanup on top of it. And here you can see I have 4 keyframes imported at the same time. So that allows me to reference one that was created before when I need to recreate the gloves from scratch, for example, because that didn't really work out in the EbSynth process. I can reference those back to a different keyframe. I can have a look at what does the face look like at this other angle. Just use that as a helping point. Sometimes I even end up copying entire chunks of the flowers in her hair, for example, because of the angle that she's moving. Things aren't really working out in the EbSynth process. And again, this is all part of the process. EbSynth is a super cool tool, but it does have its limitations. Figuring out where those limitations are can be hard to do upfront. And it just requires a little bit of testing, a little bit of hoping for the best, and when things don't work out, then you also want to be able to actually fix it yourself, because if you're completely relying on an AI generated image 100% and it goes wrong in the EbSynth process, then you're not really able to make any edits and make that animation work. But in this case, I can go back, make manual edits, and redraw the gloves if I need to, and make changes along the way. So now we're jumping into After Effects. You can see in this comp I have many keyframes. So these are all of the single keyframes that ended up being created in Photoshop to run the EbSynth process. And I'm just importing the video on top, lowering the opacity just to compare to the original end result before we start getting into the final look and feel of what we're going for. So again, I'm going to go ahead and speed up this process quite a bit and just talk over what I'm doing. I'm doing my usual setup of just making sure that all the layers are 3D. I create a camera, I create a null, that gives me a little bit more control. And now I'm just centering her in the middle of the frame. And we're going to start to get into creating the look and feel of the scene itself. And we're kicking things off with a gradient. And again, not a clear vision in mind at this point. I'm just playing around with it and seeing what works. So I'm starting things off with a yellow to white gradient. I'm going to go ahead and add an adjustment layer using posterized time. This is another tip for making these types of animations actually work a little bit better, is to artificially lower the frame rate on top of it, because that does make it look a little bit more hand-drawn, which is a pretty simple technique to get it to look a little bit better. So I'm importing some photos of leaves and stuff, and I'm just going to go ahead and add a little bit of wiggle to that in the background and just fill out the background of a little bit of a jungle vibe. So I'm using that posterized time effect on top of my leaves. I'm looking in my folder. These are just assets that I've collected over the years. And that is something I technically could have generated using Generative Fill in Photoshop, but I have these photos lying around on a hard drive. And that's also a tip that I would recommend to you, is make sure that you collect and gather assets over time, because you never know when you're going to need them. This is a perfect use case of not really having a clear vision in mind and just playing around with what does it look like to just pull a bunch of leaves and stuff in there. And I have some photos of more of a jungle environment that I can push in there, push to the background, push it very far into 3D space, and just tone everything down and try to get something that blends together and doesn't just look like we did an EbSynth animation and put it on top of a stock photo, because that also isn't really that much of a fun thing to look at. So I'm messing around with colors, messing around with blending modes, trying to get some sort of a unique feel in here where we have something that is kind of hard to analyze exactly how it was created. And that's the fun part of it, about making animations like this. We're combining many different techniques, many different styles, and many different elements to get sort of a collage endpoint, but using techniques that we're figuring out along the way. So you constantly want to think about layout, you want to think about composition. I found this pretty big leaf thing here in the middle, which I felt like I could center it right behind her, make it pink, also makes it feel very unique. I've then duplicated a version, added a wiggle to it, and made it yellow, which gives it a little bit of an offset feeling from the other one when it's wiggling around. And that again gives it a little bit of a unique feel. It feels deliberately placed behind her, even though it mainly was just an aesthetic choice that doesn't technically have any deeper meaning in this case, but you could have all of those things in mind for why you're placing things, why you're doing things that you're doing, playing around with the curves, getting a little bit of color grading to this. And here I'm just using an expression that wiggles all the different leaves to give a little bit more feeling to things being alive in the scene, but also wiggling them at a lower frame rate to again give a little bit more of that collage spider-punk type feeling. So I'm constantly going back and forth, previewing different elements, previewing the whole thing, adding big effects on top of everything, like color correction and noise and optics compensation. I'm editing parts of the comp, I'm editing small layers here and there. Really, I'm just going through and fiddling. That is the best description of the artistic process at this point. It is fiddling until things feel right. And that's not a bad thing. That is exactly what I think the process should be allowed to be in things like this. When you're working with clients, there should be a clear process in place. Everything should be very thought out. Everything should be very well communicated. When doing your own thing, drop all that stuff and just play around and have fun. So at the end of this whole thing, we're also going to be making a social media version. So the original one was 16:9, and we want to go ahead and make a vertical social media version, which is 9:16 aspect ratio. And really, all that I'm doing is I'm duplicating the comp, I'm switching layers around, I'm mostly going through all the different layers that are solids and adjustment layers, and going into the solid settings and then clicking make comp size. That's a very quick tip to just ensure that you're using the right dimensions of that layer. And there we go. This is pretty much it. All of the fiddling has come to their end, and we have a final end result that I think is looking pretty cool. And at this point, we're going to call it a day and move on to another experiment. That is what we do. We create fun animations, we play around, and we experiment for a while until we go, that's good enough, and we're done. And we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next one. So if you want to see more, stick around, subscribe, like, etc.